The following is a recording with Emil Kabisch, the head of product at Workwise and the operational product manager at Zolar.
So thanks for having me, first of all. My name is Emil. I'm what I would say kind of a product manager, product leader. I co-founded my own company and grew the company together with 3 co-founders to about 50 people. We had to liquidate the company, so I've gone through the full company life cycle, you'd probably say.
He is a successful productsman and has built product teams for the last few years.
And I'm doing a mix of things. So at Workwise, I'm currently serving as the interim head of product. So I'm taking care, I would say, of the people, of the processes in the product team. Making sure that the right things get delivered, making sure that we focus on the customer, making sure we have a clear product vision and so on. And at Zolar, I have a more operational role. So it's really taking on specific product management projects.
We dive into a lot of topics with him around product teams, products, product culture, what gives teams their drive, be that vision and direction, discovery and technology. This whole concept of eating your own dog food, which is not as disgusting as it sounds, and also opinion and feedback. So why it's important to actually talk to your customers, how to prioritize your customers over an audience, and how to focus on metrics and get the vision right.
This episode spreads a lot of light on the product management side of things. I, for one, have been consulted by Emil in the past on how to make good, smart product decisions. We even worked together in the past on some product research strategies. So this is a real good episode for anyone out there who isn't quite in the world of product, or maybe you are and you just want to validate what you already thought.
Just recently, we implemented a design system to improve the overall user and brand experience and consistency of the brand experience across all of our products at Zolar.
Very good episode for early stage seed startups out there listening, or some founders thinking about how they can implement a product team into their startup. And speaking of early stage startups or founders out there, this episode is sponsored by Codesphere. For more information on what Codesphere is, you can click on the link. But I want to just get you all ready for the up and coming Codesphere startup program, which we are very soon launching in the coming weeks. You can apply if you're a founder out there. If you have a startup, you can apply for our startup program. You'll get free credits to use on the Codesphere platform, up to $100,000 worth of credits you can use. You'll also get access to our founders community. We have a Slack channel, a Slack community there that you can be involved in, as well as some content, fast lane support for when you are using our product, some real product and startup tips and advice. As you know, the Startup Architect is all about how to build a successful startup. So the startup program, there'll be links in the following descriptions, in the following episodes in the descriptions, and just find our social media. You'll find it sooner or later, and apply now, and I'll see you on the other side of that.
Talking about making sure all shareholders are happy, and at the risk of dating the episode a bit, what's your opinion of the old Elon Musk aggressive Twitter takeover?
I think, nice question. I like it. Because I had some Twitter shares, so I followed that closely. I thought Twitter. So I've always thought Twitter was kind of a company that hasn't reached their full potential yet. And honestly, I wasn't too aware of Twitter's actual policies. I knew roughly how they were dealing with kind of opinions and labeling things on Twitter, of course. I think the one interesting thing about it is that it becomes so much a thing of ideology and of protecting a value that he has. And that's the really interesting aspect of it, right? So I don't think he's buying Twitter for the economic potential that it has. He's really not doing that. Yeah. It's not my thought. He claimed it that way. He really says, I want to kind of liberate the speech on this platform. And that value is so important to me that I'm willing to put all this money into the platform and protect that. So for me, this is really a political move, right? This is not a typical activist acquisition. He probably doesn't want to push economic value too much. It's really about, well, we have this platform, which is not too large for me to buy. It's not Facebook. He couldn't have bought Facebook, but it's still large enough that it will make a significant difference if I buy this platform and if I protect free speech on it. And I think it's a really interesting approach approach, because I don't think at that size there has been such an activist ideological takeover of a company. I'm not sure if there's.
There never has. Yeah, that's a lot of the commentary that I was reading about it is like, especially from a Wall Street point of view, people just don't get it. They can't understand what's happening because no one's really gone that full lent so hard into being an activist, investor. So everyone's a little bit like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
But yeah, I just thought it was so fascinating because the shareholders seem to have pushed back so hard, but they've just been completely overridden because he's been able to get like he booked $43 billion in 2
The initial
years.
rhetoric was that like there's no way they'd ever sell it to him, right? And now he has. I wonder how long before Trump's account becomes active again.
I mean,
he said he won't activate it again. I don't think.
Okay.
He said,
freedom of speech, but not for you.
No. I mean, Trump won't go back on it. He's already said it.
Okay,
Trump said it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't he have his own? He has his own platform now called Truth.
Yeah, he's got his own echo chamber. Yeah.
I mean,
but
in terms of, your question referred to shareholder value. I don't think it's a great shareholder outcome, right? So it's not a great shareholder outcome to take a company off at that value. And people are arguing that. So you could argue the opposite. I think everyone who was a shareholder at the current valuation believed that Twitter would be worth more in 5 years, right? So personally, I was betting on Twitter being worth more. So I don't think it's a great outcome for shareholders, essentially, right? I'm still happy about the outcome, and I think I personally think it's a good direction for the company. From a pure shareholder profit maximization point of view, I would have thought Twitter has more potential. They've had solid increases in revenue. They're experimenting with the product a lot. I think it's a company that never really got the right approach to advertising, and I don't think they fulfilled their potential in terms of business model and just pure money generation on the platform. So I think it could have been more, definitely in 5 years. Though if you look at the stock price, and that's the counter argument, right? It hasn't developed well for years since the IPO. It hasn't been a good development. But if you look at kind of the fundamentals, the Twitter business has, I think, in the last 2 years evolved quite well, and so it's a good time.
Well, people were saying a little bit like, is Jack Dorsey seeing something that no one else did? Is he gonna done? I can't remember what the CEO of AOL was when he was just like, I'm exiting, and everyone was like, why are you exiting AOL, such an up and coming company? And then obviously everything happened to AOL that it did. So people are seeing, did he sort of see some sign in the sign in the stars or whatever?
Is coming to be the new dominant platform in the space.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see.
So I think I've mentioned this in previous episodes that I'm not really an expert in the world of product very much. So I'm going to ask the stupid question of what is the real fundamental difference between a head of product and operational product management? Because
we're finally in my world, Tim, after years of interviewing developers and you berating me for not knowing the latest JavaScript library.
It's pronounced JavaScript.
Yeah, well, do you know what a product roadmap is, Tim? No, you don't.
Yeah. So the differences between those. Can you help me,
yes,
please?
Of course. So it's probably easier to start with a product manager. So let's say you're a small company and you just have a team of a couple of people. Then you have one person who's really takes care of the product vision, the product roadmap, and making sure that the right things make it into product development and rolling out the product to the market. So you have kind of one owner over the product development lifecycle, you'd probably call it. And that's a product manager. They're really usually assigned to a product and they take care of that life cycle, right? And the head of product is really more basically the team lead of multiple product managers. So once you grow to a stage where you have a couple of products or you dissect your product into different parts of the customer journey, right? Maybe the responsibilities will be a bit too much for one person. You might have different product managers. That's when you'd usually put in place a head of product to manage the team.
Okay, so maybe there's like a front end or a customer facing part of an app, and then like a client facing part of the app or something like that. That would sort of break into two different products, and then you'd have someone that would look after both, and then somebody that would sit over the top and kind of push things forward from a more senior point of view.
So I would say in terms of compared to engineering, it's probably like a head of engineering or head of front end engineering, head of back end engineering, kind of the equivalent on the product management side.
Okay, now I understand exactly what you're talking about.
Now you're a product expert.
Yeah,
So
very cool.
that's a wrap, right?
That's all we need to know about product. So you're a full stack. You do full stack product management now.
That's what I call it, yes. So essentially, you have to imagine just like in development. Like in development, you have front end, you have back end. Of course, you have testing and infrastructure. So you have different responsibilities that are required to run a tech product, right? And in product management, you could say the same. So you could say there is someone that needs to be in charge of creating a clear product vision and strategy. And then there's someone who's in charge of validating solutions with customers, prototyping, testing the solutions. And then there's someone who's in charge of the delivery of the product and then of the go-to-market. And that term has come up a bit. I think the reality is no one is a real full-stack product manager. That doesn't really exist in reality. But so when you're an early stage team, you need one person to take on all of these responsibilities, essentially, right? So at an early stage company, by default, you're usually a full stack product manager. And later on, you might grow into more specific roles. And maybe to make it clear what that is, you could, for example, become a growth oriented product manager, or you could become more of a platform product manager that's working more in the background on some platform functionality. Or you're a specific product manager to payments or more focused on pricing, right? So there are very different specifications in product management too, just like in web development in the end.
That's something we've heard a lot, I think, recording these episodes, is that you start off with this kind of like, jack of all trades, master of none role a lot of the time. And it sounds like it's the same here, where you're doing everything in this area, and then as the company grows, you just diversify and like learn where your specialities are. And I guess that's quite an important decision to make at some point, knowing when to say, okay, this is what I'm going to specialize in, and we need support somewhere else.
I don't know if it's so like, I don't know. It's obviously different for every company, but like what your company or your startup will need depends on how it grows, right? So you'll have like one product manager at the beginning, but maybe you need like a design team. So you've got a product manager who's technically in charge of design, or you might have another team because you need to become a learning company fast. It depends on your product, right? So let's say you have to research a lot, then you'll have a product research team, and there's a product manager on that team, and their job is to facilitate like the feedback from the research and then give that to the design team and stuff. So it's not a case of like, I'm product man A, and then I just decide like, I really like, product design, so that's what I'm going to do. It's startups, I think, are a really fascinating place to be in product, because products is massively broad. You can't just say you're in product. It's like, are you? Everyone's.
Well, that's often my question. It's always just like, product is such a, almost everything is. So it's such a broad stroke.
And I would say, Dan, that's a really great addition, because you need to be careful as a product manager not to claim everything kind of into your role, right? That sometimes happens, that the product managers will then think, well, I'm in charge of UX testing now, and they kind of miss the opportunity to bring in design at the right stage, and to really let that be up to an expert and bring in a professional designer who's done this for years. Because of course the designer will be much better at certain validation techniques, at prototyping and so on. And I've seen this quite a bit, that people who haven't worked in very professional and senior product teams, they're not aware what a designer can do on the team, right? So they're just like, whatever, I'll figure out the design here. I'll just do it. Yeah. I'll just do it myself. And that's obviously not always the best approach. And it's important to bring in the right people at the right time and the right experience, I think.
Delegation as opposed to actual work is the key. Yeah.
So you both mentioned that actually this kind of concept of a product team, and like obviously there's a research element and a design element, but could you just kind of dive into a little bit what a product team is, and why like putting together a team is sort of specifically important to a startup? I mean, we've kind of touched on it, but just maybe if you could break it down into a bit more detail, that'd be really useful, I think.
So in one sentence, the product team is the team that discovers, on the one hand, the product, and delivers the product. And that's really two key concepts in product development. The discovery is the whole part that happens before you ship something, right? You need a clear strategy. You need to figure out what market, what target audience are you focusing on. You need to validate certain solutions that you try to build. And then it goes into delivery. You really build the product, you build the technology, you ship it, and you bring it to market. And the product team in a modern technology company, it will usually consist of software engineers, product managers, and designers. So there's now a term for that. That's the product trio. And of course, they work quite closely with other functions such as data science, product marketing, sales operations, marketing, and so on. But essentially, that's really the product team, the team that is tasked with, we call it, discovering and delivering the product.
Okay, the product
trio.
Nice.
And why is it important? I mean, it's really, I think when you're a product-focused company, you're creating core part of the value creation happens in the product itself, right? So that's why there's such an importance on that team, because really, of course, you need to market the product, you need to bring it to market, but you need to build it. And so building the right product and building differentiators is a really essential part of any product-focused company.
When do you think that most startups, early stage startups out there, should bring in product people? Because a lot of the founding team is usually like an engineer. I don't know, there's like an engineer, then he becomes a CEO or something. So two people that design it, or, what's then first hires are so important. So where in the cycle of a product, or how do you think a founder can decide, okay, I need product management now, I need a product team, I need to build this product culture? Or do you think it's like built in? Every team needs one at the beginning. There is no question there.
Well, no, not at all. So I think, honestly, I think as late as possible in some way, because in the beginning, everyone on the team should be doing product management, right? So product management, in my opinion, should be a very founder-led things in the early stages. And that can be a very good thing. The question is, does it work, right? So, and you can really look at your own product outcomes. So if you're really able to ship a product that targets a market need and you're seeing traction and so on, I would just look at that outcome of what you're shipping, of what you're producing, and ask yourself, are we in a good state here? And if you're in a good state, I think you can delay that decision and you can hire someone a little later, because you always have the risk of hiring someone and really putting that whole product strategy and everything around product onto them and isolating that function a bit. And I don't think that needs to happen. I think at the early stages, it can really be the engineering team, the designers, the founding person, whatever background they have, that can play that role.
Are there any good indicators for you from your experience? Let's say I'm an engineering team. Is there anything I can look out for and go, okay, this is a sign that I need to, we're successful enough or we're moving in the right direction? Now's the time to start thinking about.
I think number one, if leadership has a hard time articulating where the product is going, right? So then that might help. Then you might bring in a product manager more as a facilitator, because what I see often is that founders, leaders, I would say they have a pretty clear picture, but they don't always formulate that picture into kind of a clear and concise strategy. And it's not like a product manager will come in and just kind of put down a strategy and say, well, that's where we need to go, right? It's a hard job to do. That's usually leadership job. But a product manager can recognize that gap and can make sure that this communication around strategy starts happening more and more, and really build a bridge between leadership and between the teams. And I think that's one of the signals, right? If it's not really clear what our goal here is, and a goal doesn't always have to be this 5-year strategy. So naturally, as you start out in a company, you don't know exactly where you're going to go. But I think it should be, at any point in time, it should be clear what our next step is and what we're trying to achieve. And at least it should be very clear what we're validating at the moment, right? So I think if that clarity is missing, then you might consider it. The other one is, this might be more of an operational product manager, but they're products that have a very strong operational component, right? So you need a lot of customer communication. And if other functions are overwhelmed with these things, then you might consider bringing in a person, right, to put in the right processes in place, just so that other functions don't get overwhelmed by because there is something like more day-to-day product management, I would say. And that's processing feedback, structuring the feedback.
Well, I guess that as well, that leads into the next talking point, is this whole idea of drive and goal. Because from what you're saying, it sounds like maybe the product team or the product management drive and goal might be different from maybe the lead team or the C-level drive. And then that's why diversifying things might actually be like a good idea, because if the product needs something slightly different, or kind of the two different kind of goals need to be brought together, then maybe separating things out might be a better strategy.
Yeah, I would say that to this day, goal setting in product is one of the harder things that really many, I would say the industry maybe as a whole hasn't quite figured out yet. And there's I think, a very important concept to understand that's been popularized a lot by many of the thought leaders. And that is the concept of outcomes versus outputs. And that's, I think we will need that for the further discussion, right? So as you start a product, as the three of us sit down and we want to write a little shopping app, we might all agree, well, we need kind of this list building functionality, and the user needs to be able to put different things into that list because they go shopping, and then we need a feature to tick the list off or something. And maybe we want to create different shopping lists. And now the three of us, we've just conceptualized kind of this shopping list app. And we all agree on what that shopping list app should contain, right? So in the beginning, it's fairly easy. We might have a pretty clear idea of what the features are that we want to build. But as an organization grows, it becomes impossible to set goals on a feature level, right? So if you have 4 to 5 product teams, the CEO won't have a clear picture anymore of what does each of these product teams need to build, because they won't be talking to the customer every day anymore for each of these product teams, right? So at that stage, you need a different level of goal setting, I would say. And the concept of outcomes is that you abstract what you're doing. So you don't talk on a feature basis anymore. You talk about something that you would like to achieve. And that's something that can be different things. It can either be a business outcome. So you might say, well, we have this online shop and we want to improve a conversion rate. So that's a clear outcome. We won't be talking about replacing the button or putting it somewhere else. What we're really talking about is a common goal that we have, right? And that's something that we as a product team can agree on. We can say, we want to increase conversion. And we might have our own idea, each of us, of how we achieve this goal. And the other outcome, I would say, is usually a customer outcome. So we could say, for example, we want to achieve a certain outcome for our customer. We want them to be able to deploy their app like 10 times faster than they're currently doing. At this point, we're not talking solution yet, right? We're just talking about, well, we want to make this process 10 times faster for our customer.
Yeah.
And the whole product industry has moved towards more outcome-driven product management, right? So we're not talking features nowadays anymore. We're not talking about, well, we want to build a shopping list app. The value we want to create is we help the customer remember their shopping list items. That's the outcome we want to create for a customer. And that's a very important concept in terms of goal setting. But it's also not easy, right? It's not easy to set goals on that level because there is a concept of leading and lagging indicators in product, right? And if you're asking yourself, can we increase a certain metric in our product? You need to make that metric actionable for a product team, right? So they need to sit down and they need to be able to say, what is it that I'm going to do in the product now to influence this metric? And I think finding that level of abstraction between it's not a feature that I set as a goal, but it's also not this high level business metric, which they have no idea how they're going to influence it. That's really the art of product goal setting, right? So you need the right level of product, of goals.
It feels like a really, really good way to fall out with the development team, doesn't it? Like, I just want you to achieve this intangible goal. I'm not going to get into the details. You just fix the buttons, dev team.
But it kind of completely highlights the necessity for these like interpretation roles within different teams, because you've got, like, from what you're saying, it sounds to me that you've got this kind of trickle down from like vision and drive of the kind of founders and C-levels to this product management level, and then that trickles down into design, research, and development. And it just shows you that that interface level that, it's just absolutely vital, isn't it? Because you basically need to, as you say, the abstraction level that each of those teams is working at is totally different from each other, but they are also still going in the same direction. So from a startup point of view, that's even harder, because usually you've just got like the development team, which is one developer, and the design team, which is a designer. So kind of being the person that's not only building stuff, but also interpreting whatever the hell the goal might be, that's challenging, isn't it? That's definitely, it sounds challenging when I just explained it then, but maybe it's easier than I'm imagining.
It is challenging, I think. It requires a different level of thinking, right? Because previously it's a very different type of work, just shipping a feature, versus sitting down and figuring out how to achieve a certain outcome. That's a totally different work style, right? In the first example, you would immediately dive into technical specs, and you have this feature, you have it clearly laid out, and you just, right, it's not that easy, but you just need to specify how it will work technically, right? But if you're sitting there and you're trying to improve a conversion rate or something, that's just a very abstract problem statement. Like, okay, what is the problem? Why are customers not converting? Well, I need to get out of the office and find out why our customers not converting. You need to look at product analytics. So you work a lot more research driven and analytics driven to first answer the question, why is something not happening that we want to happen? And only then you can really start thinking about now how might we achieve this? And then your point is great. I think it's a very cultural topic, right? So it's very hard to just from one day to another go to the engineers and say, well, we're not going to talk about features now. Let's just sit down and I brought this problem for you, right? So let's solve it. And the important part is, so that's a cultural change that you should not just make implicitly. You shouldn't just like from one day to another change the way you're collaborating. You should really make that explicit. And I think the first step, which is something we also do, that I do with these teams, is I sit down and I say, what kind of product culture do we want to create here? Do we all see it that way? Do we all want to work around these problem statements? Do we feel comfortable with that? Or do we really just want to kind of specify and ship the feature? And get buy-in for the type of culture you want to create first, and then create the culture, right? The worst is you move away from that responsibility and no one fills in, right? It's
drop the ball.
Yeah. And is the product culture linked directly to the team culture, or are those two completely different things, would you say?
I would say they're very related. So let's define product culture. So I would say product culture, to me, it's really the mindset, the principles, the values, and the behaviors around product development. And I would say not only on the product team, but in the whole company, because product culture is not something that can happen only in the product team. If your product team has a good product culture, but your company doesn't have a good product culture, there's a clash. So let's talk about good product culture. What do I consider good product culture, right? I think number one, it's when the product team or the whole company is customer oriented. So they're really focused on delivering value for the customer. Number two, for me, it's they have a shared vision of what they're trying to achieve, right? So what are they trying to achieve in the world? Number three is collaboration. They're collaborating well across all functions. Number four is they have a strong sense of ownership and authority of the product. And number five is they're outcome driven versus output driven. So for me, that is part of what we talked about earlier. That is part of a healthy product culture as well. And maybe you could add one, and that is, if you want to have a good product culture, you probably want to give product a seat at the leadership table, right? That's what it comes with. So if there's no one in company leadership representing product, it will be hard to create a good product culture.
It seems sometimes that the customer is very detached from early stage startups because, the focus is on funding, growth, getting the actual product built. Then it seems to be, from an outside point of view, maybe that the customer only comes in like later, or it's like, how are we going to actually get the customers involved? Do you think that's something to do with the kind of the drive of the product team? Is it because they're focusing first on discovery and technology, or is it just because the founder might already be the customer, so they feel like they have already kind of like interpreted what the customer would want? Or have I kind of read it wrong?
No, I think that describes quite well the spectrum of situations that you can encounter in a startup. There is a real risk of you as a founding team being too busy raising money and so on, right? So that is in the end, it's a distraction. So raising money does not directly contribute to building out your product vision and acquiring customers, but it's something you need to do, right? If you don't raise money, or you run out of money, so you're broke. And I've been in that situation that, and I didn't even have to do the fundraising myself. So my co-founder was taking care of it, but it can be very distracting if you're heavily involved in a fundraising process and you're the person who's in charge of product, right? It can be an issue. And I think with regards to the second part, there are very different types of companies. And there are companies where the founder is really the main driver of the vision. And they have a pretty clear picture of where the company wants to go. And that's usually the case when you have when you have founders that know a lot about the domain, right? So they know the domain, they know the technology. So you can have technically strong founders that know what needs to be done, roughly. Then there's the total opposite. So there are teams that are really just discovering a market and discovering the pain points in that market. And in that cases, you can't just rely on the founder's vision, right? You'll usually have to do a lot more research to figure out what the actual audience is, what problems they're facing, and what the product will be. And that's kind of the spectrum, really, like very vision driven and very discovery driven products.
Yeah, I think with this, like you were talking about, then like people focus a lot on like the infrastructure of starting a startup, getting the funding, building the team, finding an office space. And I think a lot of startups especially seem to take for granted that an audience will just inherently understand the why of their product. Whereas like even if you can very, very clearly articulate what we're building and how we're building it, people will still just be like, great, I don't really understand why that thing needs to exist though. And I think people often overlook this whole huge part of it. Kind of comes into discovery and research. It's like, you don't just need to speak to people and say, do you have this problem? It's like, if I build something to fix it, will you then buy it? And I think that a lot of times I see startups will get caught up in this concept of we're in the funding, we're fundraising now, and that's where our focus is. And I think this is really where good product teams can kind of make or break the direction of an early stage startup.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like really focus on the customer signals, right? Don't let kind of other signals distract you out there. Yeah, really.
Yeah, if you haven't defined your direction yet, it's so easy to get caught up in building the boat instead of like where the boat's actually going, right?
Definitely.
I have a question. It's going to seem a little bit out of left field, but hopefully you're going to quickly save it for our listeners. Can you tell me what is eating your own dog food, and why should product teams be doing this?
I thought it was going to be a really difficult Star Wars question.
Why a Star Wars question?
Well, it would be on theme for us. That's what I was thinking. Like, left field for the guest, but just as a curveball. But let's go with the dog food.
I'm glad I dodged the Star Wars question. I think that would have exposed me here. So thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. Yeah. So it's actually a funny term. I don't know where the term comes from. I should look that up someday. And we could just call it like use your own product, because that's essentially what it is. Eating your own dog food. It's using your own product.
Right. Getting high on your own supply.
Yeah, that's it.
You know where it comes from? Right?
Not Star Wars. It doesn't come from Star Wars. George Lucas didn't make it.
It comes from Star Wars, actually. No, it's because the people who used to make dog food, they used to eat it before they'd give it to the dogs.
Did they actually? I was thinking.
Yeah. Because I think that there was the big brand in the UK, Pedigree, which is like the main sort of wet food dog food brand. Right. They're owned by Mars, so like the whole thing is like part of the same food chain. It has to be it has to be kept to the same hygiene standards. So before it gets given to dogs, humans have to be able to eat it. So that's probably where it comes from.
Which is pretty great. I mean, you're giving your pet something, if you wouldn't eat it yourself, should your pet have that food? So
I mean, I suppose so. But if I have a pet snake, I'm not going to go out eating mice.
Yeah, okay. I guess if we go beyond dogs, then it becomes tricky.
Eat your own snake food doesn't work as well.
Okay, so from that astute analogy, I guess that eating your own dog food means that like you should become part of your own audience.
Well, I would say the following to that. It works when you are part of your own audience. And what I mean by that is it will work especially well if you are experiencing the problem that your product is solving for, right? I think it's kind of hard to just make yourself have that problem. And I think a great example, the company I'm working with, Workwise, we're using our own recruiting software to recruit people. Because that's a real challenge we're facing every day. We're recruiting people so we can use the product. Of course, you can also just use the product and click around and say, I'm using the product now. But I think you should always use it in a very real context. And using it in a very real context can only be done if you're experiencing the actual problem. That being said, I think it's very valuable to be part of your own audience. And it has some disadvantages, which we'll get to in a second. But it's also not necessary, right? So there are many, many product teams which are not using their own products and they're not able to. So let's say in this Zolar company that I'm working with, it's not like everyone has a home and is building a solar roof.
I was about to make a joke and ask it, are they totally powered from their own solar panels?
No, I mean, most live in a flat in Berlin, right? So it's not like they could just install a solar panel. I think the important part here is you should at least care for your customer, right? And you should care for their problem. And I think as long as that's given and you can really identify with what you're solving, that's a good sign. The advantage of using your own product, eating your own dog food, not sure which term we should use from now on.
I don't like this term that you've written down here. So Tim's, for the listeners out there, this is one of Tim's notes. What's eating your own dog food?
I think it's my fault. I put that in there. I threw that in there.
I think
I was led. I'm not going to deny that I didn't write it down, but I was led down the dog food aisle of the.
If I could just rephrase it for posterity, like, why is it important to understand and use your own product.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because products are delicious and they're designed for dogs.
It's also not like we need a metaphor for using your own product, right? So that's pretty clear. So
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just fun to say it, I guess.
It's fun. Yeah. And it's a term. So in the product industry, people will know what you're talking about. You can use that term. I mean, so the pro is really, I think you really, so if you're experiencing the product and if I'm recruiting with the software that I'm designing, right, then I will really make sure I will have kind of a strong motivation to make the product better, because I experience the problems in the product every day, especially if you have UX issues. It's quite fascinating. Once you use a product and you stumble upon your own UX issues in a product, you just want to go out and fix them. You don't want to experience them every day, right? Yeah. The disadvantage is, of course, you have to be careful not to mix yourself up with the entire target audience. So you're also just one person in your own target audience. But not everyone in your target audience is the same. And you might have adjacent target audiences that you're targeting over time. So at some point, you have to also zoom out a little bit and not kind of mix yourself up with your entire target audience. You need to make sure to then get out and to understand different segments of your target audiences, right? And that can be a bit of a risk. If you're just building your own product kind of for years, you might, it might work for a while, but at some point you need to expand beyond your own needs and build something else. So.
Is that kind of where the line between audience and customer blurs, where you maybe first start with an audience and then your customer base grows and grows, and that's who you have to focus on because then wants and needs might be different?
So the way I see it is you're basically constantly looking to find product market fit in new audiences. And I think that's the good way to think about it. So it's not like you'll suddenly have found one audience out there. Sometimes I think in some B2C examples, that is the case, right? You have a very vast audience and you can spend years delivering a product for that audience. If you're building for B2B, I would say that's usually a little different because your market is a lot more fragmented. If you're serving companies are very different in size and how they work and so on. So I think it's really a series of product and market fits, or you might replace market here with audiences, right? So you always need to make sure what is the next audience that I'm targeting that will deliver value for my product. Okay. And I think that's important to make sure. At the moment, we're targeting companies between 5 and 10 people. And for that reason, they're obtaining value from our product. But there are companies between 10 and 50 people. They work a little differently, and we need to build a different feature set to solve their problems. And that's our next target group, right? And you really, there's the concept of going up market, for example, where you really start with small companies and you go up market more towards enterprises, right? That's it's quite a common strategy.
All right, I was going to ask then about how important it is for customer focus, because you were talking then about how you shouldn't be super focused on, like, let's say you are using your own product, you find issues. It's really a balance of like, okay, this is a very important thing to fix from my point of view, but the overall, let's say we interview 100 people for feedback and 80% of them want this feature. No matter what the roadmap is, do we focus then on like just user feedback? Like this is what people are asking for, this is where we move next? Or is it, this was our plan in the first place? How do you draw that line between like focusing on your customer and following like a product plan?
Great question. Also, there is the philosophy of the customer doesn't really know what they want, right? So because you're the technology team building it. So if your customer knew exactly what they want, they would be building it, right? It wouldn't be kind of your tech team. And I think the key concept here is, yes, you need to, I think every good product team should be fairly customer obsessed, right? And really focus on the customer. And in the vast marketplace of ideas and products nowadays, I think it will always kind of the product that serves the customer better will win in the long term. The question is more, how do you focus on customers? And there are very different ways of doing that. Number one, you could ask like 40 customers, what do you want? And they'll tell you, like 30 of them will tell you, oh, I want this feature. And you build this feature. That's one way to look at it. Ideally, I would say you should focus more on what problem does the customer want solved. And then you should, as a team, find and bring the most innovative solution to that problem. So just be careful. Is your customer telling you exactly what they want built, or is your customer telling you what problems they're experiencing? And you might have a better way of solving that problem. And that's the whole concept in design thinking too, of problem and solution space. Really listen to your customer, but make sure you've understood the problem and the solution they want, and consider whether there's a better solution, right? Because it's not like a customer will always tell you what the best solution to your problem is.
No, for example, they might only see their perspective, right? Like, hey, I can't understand anyone, give me a translate button, when the solution is like, stop matching them with Korean customers, for example.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, for sure.
For example, I also think you you run this risk if you give customers exactly what they want of this like snowballing effect. Like, so you'll give them like, oh, I want to be able to see the other user, so you give them video, and then it's like, okay, well, where's the audio? I expected audio with the video, and then you give them that, and then the next thing is, well, I need a chat with this video function as well. So it just kind of branches down. So you have to be very careful not to just give a user the feature that they seemingly want, right? It's a very fine line, I think.
There's for anyone listening who wants to dive deeper, the concept of jobs to be done and jobs to be done maps is a really good way to cluster and to categorize customer needs and really to abstract from a very specific customer need to a very high level customer need. That
was always something that was when I used to work kind of on the operations side in an agency in London. That was always one of the hardest things with clients, was that they would always just tell you the problem. They'd always tell you their solution to the problem. They wouldn't tell you the problem itself. And it was always around, like, if you built a website, it had like, they'd want sound playing, and they'd always want the sound to be auto playing or the video to be auto playing. And it's like, is it because you have to decipher it? It's like, well, is it because you want it to be more attention grabbing? Because as a user, that's the most annoying thing, like anything that auto plays or auto starts is the worst. So yeah, deciphering all that kind of stuff. And I guess even from adding it from customer to product team is even harder, because every customer is going to have a different opinion. But yeah, I definitely remember how annoying and frustrating that was, that this you never just get given the problem, you get given this kind of vague potential solution, as opposed to just like, this is what I'm struggling with, which would be.
Do you think it's like that negative review thing, like so let's say you have video players that don't autoplay. The only people who are going to give feedback are the ones that want it to. So from the perspective of the feedback board, you've got 10 people asking for autoplay, but that's because 200 people are happy with it not autoplaying. So you have to, I think, like really like decipher what customers do and don't want or need, and how to value and prioritize it.
Yeah.
But I guess that from a product point of view, that's where like data-driven product would come in, right? Because then you've got opinions, but then you've also got like, well, this is how people are using this app. Most people, if you can see if you can see the interactions as a flow, if people are interacting quickly or like, in the direction you want, then that's where you see that's where it cleans up the false positives or false negatives, or whichever way around you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, that's also, to me, that's kind of the exciting part of product management. You always have these adverse effects, right? And you always have a trade-off. So every single feature you ship, you're adding complexity for your existing users, right? So you need to always consider that. I guess in the specific example of autoplay audio on websites, that hasn't really... we don't see too much nowadays anymore. So
yeah, we all agree that's a bad feature.
No, but
yeah, we as in the internet using community.
So we pushed back on that. That's great. No, I mean, so there are really two dimensions to look at, and so at any point in time, product management, you need to do some form of, it's called impact sizing. So what you're trying to estimate is both the positive and the negative impacts of what you're choosing to ship. And you can do that. On one hand, you're always trying to figure out what size of my user base is this really addressing, right? So are we optimizing something for 2% of the user base here because they want audio autoplay on a website, right? That's something to be careful with. If only 2%, then it should be very, very valuable to those 2% to ship it, right? And that's the other dimension, is really how much impact does it have on the individual that derives a positive impact of it. And those are the two functions you look at. How many people can I influence with this, and how strongly can I influence and impact people with this? And that's always the two factors to consider. And I think that varies from company to company. If you're a B2B company that derives 80% of their revenue from a couple of key accounts, of course, those couple of key accounts will have a very strong voice in your product development. It's important for them. So you have to cluster your market a bit and see what the market structure is. If you're having thousands of users, then you have to be much more careful to really get a large sample there, right? And validate it with a large sample and making sure it addresses all users. And otherwise you just run into complexity and build a really complex product that no one likes to use in the end.
And maybe we could dive into that a little bit, that kind of whole area of like feedback and opinion. Because I mean, is it hard to get real feedback on your product? And is it difficult to kind of split out people buying into the product and not the vision of the product, especially at an early stage?
Yeah, maybe let's start with the second question, because that's a really good one. So there's definitely a risk of you as a founder or as an early stage product team getting buy-in for the vision and kind of mistakening that for real product buy-in. And my opinion on that is really like prove to your customer that you can really make your life better, and then check what their invest is in your product. So if you tell someone we're building this and they, oh, that's great, that's awesome, it's going to be amazing, right? That's not a real investment in your product. I've just voiced kind of a positive opinion on you. I'm like, yeah, it's easy for me to give that praise. It takes me about 5 seconds. But if you provide me with something and then I start using it and I switch to Codesphere, for example, that takes some switching cost, right? I'll be setting infrastructure on Codesphere. So it will cost me something to move away. And that's a real signal, right? The real signal is not, well, Codesphere is awesome. The real signal is going to Codesphere. So that's a really good point there. You need to go from, in the beginning, people might buy into your vision, but more and more you need to listen to the real investment signals that customers make into your product. And at first you need to deliver. Okay. That's kind of, I think, the main point here. You need to deliver to the customer something in the beginning to make them invest, right? People won't just invest if they don't get any value out of it. Maybe because they're your friends and they like you. Yeah. So, which brings us to the first question. Real customer feedback. I mean, I guess we mean kind of real life, honest customer feedback, right? So that's
more. What exactly did you mean, Tim? Do you mean real feedback, as in people who are not just giving overly positive feedback, or did you mean like feedback from real customers? What?
Well, I guess just real world, real world usage of a product, because there's one thing to test it, and there's one thing to be guided through user testing and someone to sit with you and show you or look through a Figma file or, using like an early beta version of it. But then, I know that I use products all the time, which I'm sometimes it's like, that's annoying, but I just get on with using it. But I'm sure the product team would really appreciate that feedback. And I would say that it's actually very difficult, for tools that I use every day, just to be able to send that to somebody and actually provide the real feedback on it. And sometimes you just kind of just get on with it. So I guess it's just those real world scenarios where people might just put up with it, but then it would be really good for you as a product owner to know about that so you can improve the product.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think there are two valid ways to get that kind of feedback, right? And what you mentioned is exactly always a risk, right? You shouldn't just kind of run someone else through the product, right? And just kind of, this is where you find this and that, and that's how you can do it. Now go for it. Let me know how it goes. Well, you've just framed them, right? You've just kind of taken the chance of them experiencing the product by themselves. And there are, I think, two ways of doing this. Number one is you do this kind of demo style, but you really ask the customer to just complete a regular part of their workflow, right? And you just say, well, why don't you set this up in Codesphere and I'll just be watching you, just think out loud, let me know what you're thinking and how you're feeling about it. And it's hard because I think we want to show people the product and like, look, this is what we've built and this is what you can do. And I think that's...
Don't click there.
Yeah. You've
been watching some of our user research.
Some of them. And of course, and you need a fairly good, either a very, very good prototype or the actual product to do this, right? Of course. So that's the tricky part of it. But really just kind of ask users, what is it you're trying to do? And they'll tell you what they want to do. And then, okay, well, just go for it, right? Try to do exactly what you want to do now with our product. And I'll just be sitting here watching. And the other way to do this is you try to get them right after the interaction with the product, right? So let's say they sign up to something and they move a project or they start a project on Codesphere. Then a really example would be to capture them an hour after that experience, like really, really soon. And the point of capturing them really soon is we forget so quickly about our own experiences. And I think a great example, so what was kind of the last products that you bought, just kind of physical products? What do you think? Do you remember?
I bought these noise cancelling headphones, actually, my most recent real life purchase.
And when was that?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, okay. How did you find out about the headphones?
A colleague recommended them to me.
Okay. And then how did you go about it? Like, what was kind of the moment when you decided, I'm going to buy those headphones?
I actually saw a lot of people walking around with them. So I had a few options, and I saw a lot of people wearing these specific headphones. And I was like, well, if there's a lot of people wearing them, they must be good.
Oh, that's an interesting way to get it.
Yeah.
How long was that from your friend's recommendation to your buying the headphones?
It was quite a long time because I knew that it would be a bit of an investment. So I didn't want to just kind of rush into it. So maybe it was like 3-week process of thinking about buying the headphones. Yeah.
Okay. And then how did you go about the purchase?
I bought them off the official website because they had them discounted.
Okay, got it. So I could talk to an hour about this purchase experience now with you, right? And that's how I would usually actually do it. If I were interested in you buying a headphone, I would spend so much time dissecting these little details. And now I don't want to run the podcast 2 hours over and talk about headphone purchases.
Dan and I will leave, and we'll just come back in an hour.
Yeah, okay, that's another one. I mean, I hope the concept becomes clear, right? What you're really trying to figure out is these little nuances. Okay, you saw people with a headphone and that influenced your perception of those headphones, right? Yeah. And it's really important to find out these little things in the story that influenced your purchasing decision. Yeah. And I mean, I would say maybe if something's 2 weeks back, you can still reconstruct the customer experience fairly well. But ideally, you really try to reconstruct it right after the usage, right? So you try to get the customer on the phone and just go very deep in terms of how was that experience for you, right? How did that work out for you? Did you manage to achieve what you tried to achieve?
Well, get them while they're still angry that your product wasn't working for them.
Always
Still
good
crying.
feedback.
That's cool.
All right, one last question then before you go. I wanted to get like a top tip of let's go one positive and one negative. Let's talk about a product process, maybe in product design or something that you see early stage startups, a mistake that they've made, or maybe you've made, that you would give advice out there to some of our listeners not to make in the early stages of your product life. I mean, if there isn't one, if you've never made a mistake, then great.
Yeah, no, I love many of them.
Don't actually eat dog food.
Yeah,
Yeah, don't actually. I would say, I think one, I would say one that I observe frequently in VC-funded startups. That's a reality, is to be careful not to optimize for financial or other quantitative metrics too early. And I think that's what really splits some of the good teams apart, is that they spend a lot of time just being a bit patient and building a really, really good product on a more qualitative basis, right? And not focusing on growth too early at all cost. And obviously it's very hard to generalize something like that. In some cases, it's just kind of growth at all cost, and you really want to grow your user base as quickly as possible. But I would really focus on building a kind of a deep product, I would call it, right? That really solves a problem before you start to scale it and just focusing on pure financials. The reason being, optimizing for pure financial growth, it can set the wrong incentives at an early stage, right? It might force certain decisions that you wouldn't otherwise make on your product that you don't want to make. That's a big one. And the other one is, we talked a bit about audiences, and you did a great podcast on audiences. And I think a mistake that many make is not targeting on a clear audience. And I think targeting on a clear audience, it's not that difficult, right? It's not that difficult to sit down and consider what are the characteristics of our ideal customer? What are really the characteristics of a company that will benefit from this product? And just focus on that for the moment. It will make a lot of decisions, I think, much clearer if you know who you're developing the product for. So I would say not targeting on a clear audience or on a specific audience. That's another mistake that we definitely made, and that I would be aware of. Yeah.
I, for example, am always recommending this. Start with the why, golden circle, thing. That's my go-to thing. If any company I speak to asks me for advice, that's my thing. Like, make sure you can internally communicate that to your teams. They know which direction they're pulling in, and make sure you can communicate externally so everyone understands why. What's your go-to golden piece of advice for startup founders out there who are just coming into the product management side of things?
Yeah, that's a great one. And maybe the other one I would add, and it's very close, because often the why is the customer or the problem you're solving for the customer. And I would just say, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, and really, really obsess over the customer and over the problem that you're solving for. And as long as you're focused on that, I think you're on a really good path. And if you're able to put that in front of the team and really put that up as a mission, as a vision, this is the change we're trying to achieve for these people, for that target audience, then you're on a good path. So I would say customer focus, customer obsession. Can rarely be wrong with that.
That's the gold.
Well, I actually I read your article that you wrote a couple of years ago, actually, and there was a good section in that about customer obsession. And I think you quote somebody as saying that the product team must be customer obsessed. But just to finish, I was wondering, since you wrote that article, has anything changed since you wrote that article about building product teams? Is there now new advice or new thinking that you kind of incorporate?
So the target audience is one, for sure. I mean, maybe a couple of trends, right, in product management. I think something that's gotten a lot more attention is the concept of product discovery. And there are a lot more resources now. There's a great book by Teresa Torres called Continuous Discovery Habits that really helps bring a more discovery-focused organization and do more discovery, get closer to the customer, right, that concept. I think some other things have definitely changed. So when the article was, I think, 2 months before COVID hit, and we've all gone remote, I think teams have gotten a lot more diverse. I'm now working with a lot more diverse teams than previously. So that's definitely changed. Probably productivity has increased a lot since then, I would say. So we're working with much better tools, and I can see that the cycles in which we iterate on product are just much, much faster, and you need to really keep up, right? So you can't really slow down. Like product development is a very kind of fast, short-paced discipline as well. And the personal learning is probably in that article, I made a lot of generalizations and just I would probably make a lot less now, right? Because I've seen more teams, I've seen different contexts, and now I tend to think a lot more in frameworks and kind of what factors make you decide something rather than, well, this is kind of the one size fits all approach, right? I try to look more like what are the driving factors here and address the factors and figure out. There's never really that perfect answer. There's not that one product culture. There's not that one product development framework, right? There's not that perfect way to create a product vision or strategy. It just doesn't exist. So you need to tailor your approach. That's what I learned for myself.
And this is a bit of a leading question. Maybe it's a bit intense final question, but one of the things that I picked up from the article is there's a lot of focus on clarity and knowing how to manage products and product teams and like life cycle length, short, mid-term and long-term. So how important do you think it is to know when to pivot or break from a plan with your previous experience in mind?
So that's the single hardest question I think I've faced in my own company, right? Because by definition, when you're founding a company, you're doing something that's slightly unlikely to succeed, right? So yeah, I mean, that's true. So when you're working on something, it almost seems like it's this really hard thing, right? And by default, it just doesn't really make sense doing it, right? And I think, honestly, in the end, it's kind of a gut feeling that is informed by market feedback and by customer feedback. In the end, honestly, I think it's gut feeling. The one important thing is when you're evaluating strategic options, right, and you need to bury something at some point, I would just encourage really steer in a clear direction. And if you change direction, then steer clearly into the new direction. I think the worst you can do is leaving all of these things open and pivoting back and forth. So pivoting is fine, but just don't pivot back and forth all the time.
Okay, yeah.
And that's what can happen, right? Because these ideas resurface and then maybe a new idea doesn't work and you go back to the other one and you think, well, maybe that was the better one. So I think there's a certain case of validating something and then saying, well, that's not where we're going to go. And we're going to kind of put this in the drawer for now, right? And really move in a different direction and commit to that direction. But it's tough because sometimes it really takes three years of work until something really clicks and validates. And that's the crazy part. So sometimes if you've been working on something for 2 years and it doesn't quite work, the only logical thing is to give it up. But it's not always the right choice. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Tell that to my ex-wife.
The general, yeah. Okay. Closing words by Dan.
That's the
end. I think the core principle here is maximize, not with regards to that, Dan.
Okay, just stick with it.
Okay, let's get back to product. I guess the core principle is maximize for learning speed early, right? So that's how you can just really make sure you get these very, very short and tight feedback loops, because it's you can test kind of 40 ideas in the beginning, but you can't build a whole product for 3 years and then build a new one for another 3 years, right? So you want to really keep that feedback loop short and validate quickly. And that's something that is kind of, if you're with 10 people, you can do that very easily and very fast, but try shifting a 150 people company in a new direction. It's a different ship.
Well, this is what our previous guest, last week's guest, Jacob, was saying, because he was saying that you've got to optimize this velocity speed without the train coming off the tracks, essentially. So, and he was saying that as the team got bigger and bigger, that gets harder and harder, because you try and maintain this pace of iterating and shipping, but equally you don't want the wheels to fall off. And the analogy there is a train as opposed to dog food, so it's a little bit more pleasant to talk about.
Yeah, let's stick to that one then in the future. Sounds good.